He almost ran through the hospital corridor, the sound of his steps echoing against the cold walls, because somewhere upstairs a millionaire was waiting to be saved and the entire city seemed to be holding its breath for that one life. And yet right at the entrance, on the hard concrete near the glass doors, he noticed a woman lying on the ground, weak, dusty, and almost invisible to everyone passing by. People looked at her and turned away as if she was not even human, and for a moment he felt the familiar heaviness in his chest, the same quiet pain he had carried for years, because he knew what it felt like to be unseen, to be treated like you did not matter, to be ignored while others walked past as if your suffering was just part of the street. And even though he was already late and the pressure on him was immense, he stopped. He knelt beside her. He saw her trembling hands and the wounds on her arms, and without asking who she was or where she came from, he quietly opened his bag and began to clean her injuries, his movements calm, careful, almost gentle, as if time had slowed down for just a few moments in the middle of chaos. She looked at him with tired eyes, the kind of eyes that had seen too much pain, and for a second he felt a deep sadness rise inside him, because he had seen that same look in the mirror many years ago, back when he was just a poor boy who was mocked, pushed aside, and told he would never become anything. The guards at the entrance shouted at him to hurry. The hospital director himself was waiting upstairs. The richest man in the city was on the operating table, and failure was not an option, but still he finished treating her wounds. He wrapped the cloth around her arm, and as he stood up to leave, she grabbed his sleeve with surprising strength. Her voice was barely a whisper, almost lost in the noise around them, but her words were clear. She said, "Look under the surgery table," and then her hand slowly slipped away. He stared at her for a second, confused, unsure if he had heard correctly, but there was something in her eyes, something steady and certain, and he nodded without saying anything, then rushed inside, up the stairs, past the nurses and assistants who were already panicking. Inside the operating room the air felt heavy, tense, and silent. The powerful hospital director stood in the corner with crossed arms, his expression cold and proud, a man who believed money could control everything, a man who never once looked at the surgeon with respect, only with expectation, as if he was just a tool, and for years the surgeon had worked under his shadow, silent, patient, swallowing every insult, every moment of humiliation, every time his ideas were ignored, every time someone else took credit for his work, and yet he never complained. He just kept going, believing that one day truth would find its way to the surface. The millionaire lay unconscious on the table, surrounded by machines and quiet whispers. The team was ready, the operation had to begin, and just as he stepped closer, the memory of the woman's whisper returned to him, soft but sharp. "Look under the surgery table." He hesitated for only a second, then slowly bent down, and what he saw made his heart stop. Hidden beneath the table was a small device, thin wires, placed so carefully that no one would notice unless they were looking for it. His hands went cold, his mind racing. This was not part of any medical equipment. This was something else, something dangerous, something that could turn a life-saving surgery into a tragedy. He straightened up and looked around. The director's eyes met his for a brief moment, and there was something there, something dark and impatient, as if he was waiting for something to happen. The surgeon felt a deep wave of helplessness, because this man was powerful, untouchable, respected by everyone, and who would believe a quiet doctor over him? For years he had stayed silent. For years he had watched injustice and said nothing, but now there was a life on the table, and another truth hidden just beneath it. He took a slow breath, steadying himself, his voice calm as he ordered the team to pause. He asked for the table to be moved. The nurses looked confused. The director frowned, his tone sharp as he demanded to know what was happening, but the surgeon did not answer. He simply reached down and carefully pulled out the device, holding it up in the bright light, and the room fell into a deep, heavy silence. The director's face changed for just a second, the confidence gone, replaced by something closer to fear. And in that moment the surgeon finally understood everything. The whispers, the strange delays, the pressure to rush. Someone had planned for this surgery to fail, and if it had, no one would have questioned it, because accidents happen, machines fail, and powerful people always stay clean. The sadness he had carried for so long slowly began to shift, replaced by a quiet hope, because for the first time the truth was in his hands. He asked security to come, his voice steady, patient. And when they arrived, the device was taken, questions began. and the powerful director who once stood untouchable was suddenly just a man surrounded by suspicion. The operation continued safely, the millionaire survived, and days later the truth came out. The director had planned everything to gain control over the man's fortune through hidden deals and pressure. But one whisper from a woman everyone ignored had changed the entire story. And when the surgeon went back to the entrance to find her, she was gone, no name, no trace, just the memory of her tired eyes and her quiet voice. And for the first time in years, he felt something warm in his chest, not pride, not victory, but a calm sense of justice, slow, patient, and unexpected, finally finding its way into the light. He could not stop thinking about her after that day, even as the hospital slowly returned to its usual rhythm and people began to talk about him in a different way, with respect in their voices instead of quiet dismissal. But inside he still felt the same silence, the same weight he had carried for years, because praise could not erase the memory of the many nights he had gone home feeling small, unappreciated, and alone. And as he stood by the window of his office looking down at the busy street, he kept searching the crowd for a glimpse of the woman who had changed everything with just a whisper. Yet she never appeared. It was as if she had only existed for that one moment. The investigation into the director grew deeper each day. Powerful names began to surface, hidden deals, stolen money, threats that had been buried for years, and slowly the truth began to shake the foundation of the hospital. People who once walked proudly now spoke in low voices, afraid of what might be revealed next, and for the first time the surgeon saw something he had never seen before. The powerful looking nervous, uncertain, almost human, but with every new revelation came a new kind of pressure. Reporters waited outside, officials asked endless questions, and some of the staff looked at him with quiet blame, as if he had broken an unspoken rule by refusing to stay silent. And once again he felt that old helplessness trying to return, the feeling that no matter what he did, someone stronger could still crush him. He remembered the days when the director would call him into his office, speak down to him, question his decisions in front of others, take credit for successful surgeries and leave him alone to face anger when things went wrong. He had endured it all without complaint, believing patience was the only way forward. But now everything had changed, and change always brought fear. One evening as he prepared to leave, a nurse approached him quietly, her face tense, her voice barely steady. She told him that someone had been asking about him, someone important, someone who was not happy with what had happened, and for a moment a deep sadness settled over him again, because he understood that justice always had a price, and those who lost power did not forgive easily. That night he walked home slowly, the city lights dim and distant, his mind heavy with thoughts, wondering if he had done the right thing, wondering if the truth was worth the trouble it had brought into his life. And yet somewhere deep inside, a small quiet hope remained, the same hope that had kept him going through years of humiliation, the belief that kindness and patience could still mean something in a world ruled by money and influence. Days passed, and the story of the saved millionaire spread across the city. People praised the miracle, but very few knew how close it had come to disaster, and even fewer knew about the woman at the door. One afternoon, as he was leaving the hospital, he saw a familiar figure sitting across the street near a small tea stall, wrapped in the same worn shawl, her posture weak but her eyes calm, and for a moment he just stood there, unsure if she was real or just a memory his heart had created. Then he slowly walked toward her, his steps careful, almost afraid she might disappear again. When he reached her she looked up and gave a small, tired smile, as if she had been expecting him all along. He thanked her, his voice low and sincere, told her that because of her the operation had been saved and a life had been protected. She listened quietly, then looked down at her hands, and in a soft voice she said that sometimes the truth hides where no one wants to look, and sometimes only those who know pain can see it clearly. He did not fully understand her words, but he felt their weight. He offered to help her, to bring her inside the hospital, to make sure she was treated properly, but she gently shook her head, her eyes distant, as if her path was leading somewhere else, and before he could say anything more, she stood up slowly and walked away into the moving crowd, leaving him standing there once again with a strange mix of peace and sadness, as if he had just witnessed something important yet could not hold onto it. In the days that followed, the investigation reached its final stage. The former director was arrested, his influence no longer enough to protect him, and the people who once feared him began to speak openly about the wrongs they had seen and suffered. And through it all, the surgeon remained the same quiet man, working long hours, speaking little, carrying inside him a deep patience that had been shaped by years of struggle. And as justice slowly unfolded, not with noise or celebration but with steady and undeniable truth, he began to understand that sometimes the smallest act of kindness, given without expecting anything in return, can change the course of many lives in ways no one could ever imagine. The weeks passed quietly, but the silence was different now, softer, less heavy, as if something inside the hospital had finally begun to breathe again. And although people greeted him with warmth and respect, he still moved through the corridors the same way, calm and focused, never seeking attention, never raising his voice, because deep inside he was still the same man who had learned to endure without complaint, the same man who knew what it felt like to be overlooked, and yet there was a strange feeling growing in him, something like patience mixed with quiet hope, as if life was slowly guiding him towards something he could not yet see. One late evening, after finishing a long surgery, he stepped outside into the cool air and noticed an old man sitting on the steps near the entrance, his clothes worn, his face tired, and for a moment the surgeon was taken back to that first day, to the woman lying on the ground while everyone passed her by. He walked over and asked gently if the man needed help. The old man looked at him with eyes full of hesitation, as if he was not used to kindness, and then slowly explained that his daughter had gone inside hours ago but had not come back out. She was sick, weak, and alone, and he had no money to pay for treatment. The surgeon felt that same sadness again, the kind that pressed quietly against his chest, because no matter how much changed, there were still people standing outside the doors of care, waiting, hoping, afraid. He brought the old man inside, spoke to the nurses, and made sure the daughter was admitted and treated, and once again he did it without asking for anything, without even giving his name, just the simple act of helping because he could not walk past someone in pain. As the night grew deeper and the hospital lights dimmed, he passed by the ward where the young woman was resting, and as he glanced inside, something made him stop. Sitting beside the bed was the same woman in the worn shawl, her hand gently resting on the patient's arm, her face calm and still. For a moment he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him, but when she turned and saw him, she gave that same quiet smile, the one that carried both sadness and peace. He stepped inside slowly, his voice soft as he asked if she knew the girl. She nodded and said that sometimes strangers become family when no one else is left. Her words were simple but they stayed with him, and he realized she was not just a passerby. Not just someone who appeared once and disappeared, she was someone who moved through the edges of the world, seeing what others refused to see, helping in small, silent ways, and leaving without asking for recognition. He wanted to ask her more, to understand who she was and how she knew about the device under the table that day, but something in her calm presence stopped him. It felt as if the answers were not meant to be spoken out loud, as if some things were simply meant to be felt and accepted. The next morning he learned that the young woman would recover, and when he went back to the ward to check on her, the woman in the shawl was gone again. No one had seen her leave, no one knew her name, and once again he was left with only the memory of her eyes and her quiet strength. Life continued, the hospital slowly healed from the scandal, new leadership arrived, promises were made about fairness and honesty. And for the first time in many years, the surgeon felt that his work was truly valued, but he never forgot the past, he never forgot the humiliation, the nights he questioned his own worth, the times he stood silent while powerful voices spoke over him, and maybe that was why he noticed the small things others missed. The nervous nurse afraid to speak, the young intern blamed for mistakes he did not make, the cleaner who worked long hours without anyone even learning her name. And instead of looking away, he began to quietly stand beside them, offering calm words, patient guidance, small acts of support that slowly built trust. And as the months passed, something unexpected began to happen. People started to speak more honestly, to stand a little taller, to believe that kindness did not have to mean weakness, that patience did not have to mean silence. And one evening as he stood alone in the operating room after another long day, he looked down at the same table where everything had once nearly gone wrong, and he felt a deep, steady sense of calm, because the injustice that had once seemed so powerful and untouchable had been exposed, not by force or anger, but by a single moment of compassion and a whisper from someone the world had ignored. And in that quiet room, he finally understood that justice does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it grows slowly, patiently, carried by people who refuse to stop caring even when no one is watching. Winter came quietly that year, and with it came a strange sense of stillness that settled over the hospital, the kind that made every sound feel softer and every moment feel longer. And as the days grew colder, the surgeon found himself thinking more often about the path his life had taken, about the years of silence, the unfair treatment, the humiliation he had swallowed without complaint, and how close he had come to believing that nothing would ever change. Yet somehow everything had, slowly and patiently, without noise or pride, just as if life had been waiting for the right moment to turn. One evening as snow began to fall outside, he was called to the emergency room for a critical case. A woman had been brought in, weak and barely conscious, and when he stepped closer and saw her face, his heart tightened. It was her, the same woman in the worn shawl, the one who had once been lying at the hospital entrance while the world walked past, the one whose quiet whisper had changed the fate of so many people. She looked smaller now, more fragile, as if time had finally caught up with her, and for the first time he felt true helplessness, because the person who had saved so many without asking for anything was now the one in need. He worked with calm focus, every movement careful and steady, refusing to let fear take over. Hours passed as he and his team fought to stabilize her, and in the silence of the operating room, he remembered the day he had first knelt beside her on the cold ground, the way she had looked at him, the quiet strength in her eyes, and he realized that this was the moment when patience and kindness had come full circle, when the one who had given hope was now receiving it. The surgery was long and difficult, but in the end her breathing became steady, her pulse grew stronger, and a quiet sense of relief filled the room. Days passed before she finally opened her eyes, and when she saw him sitting beside her bed, she smiled faintly, as if she had always known he would be there. He asked her gently why she had helped him that day, how she had known about the danger under the operating table. She stayed silent for a moment, then said in a soft voice that people who live on the streets learn to notice what others ignore. They hear things, they see things, and sometimes they understand truths that powerful people believe are hidden forever. She told him she had once worked in the hospital years ago, long before her life had fallen apart, and she had recognized the men who placed the device. She had tried to warn someone, but no one had listened, until he stopped for her, until he treated her like she mattered, and in that moment she knew she could trust him. Her words were simple, but they carried a deep quiet weight, and he felt a sadness that slowly turned into something warmer, something closer to peace, because the injustice she had suffered, the years she had been ignored and forgotten, had not broken her kindness. She had still chosen to help, still chosen to speak, even when her voice was just a whisper. The news of her recovery spread quietly among the staff, and people began to visit her. Nurses brought her tea, the cleaners sat beside her and talked. The young intern she had once comforted now stood at her door every morning just to ask how she was feeling, and for the first time in many years she was no longer invisible. The hospital that had once turned its back on her now surrounded her with care, and the surgeon watched it all with a calm, steady heart, because this was the kind of justice he had always believed in, not loud or cruel, but gentle and patient, built from small acts of kindness that slowly healed old wounds. Months later, when spring arrived, she was strong enough to leave, and on her last day she stood at the entrance where she had once been lying on the cold ground, the same place where everything had begun. She turned to him and thanked him quietly, but he shook his head and said that it was she who had changed everything. She smiled and walked away into the morning light, and this time he did not feel sadness as he watched her go, only a deep sense of calm, because he understood now that even the quietest voices can bring truth into the world, and even the smallest act of kindness can lead to justice, if someone is patient enough to keep believing.